Did I scare you? I apologize. I apologize for kind of coming in a bit crazy. I'm sorry about that, but serial killers have been around for a long time, and I make videos about things that are bad. A lot of the time, drama sometimes the CIA. What is all this shit? There's just shit on, ignore that. Mysteries, conspiracies, all of it. And if you hit the like button and leave me some ideas on what to cover next down below, I'd be very excited. Today, we're talking about ancient serial killers. People who were alive before the modern era, before the Industrial Revolution, before killing got way more difficult.
When they presented him with his sack of human body parts, he admitted his identity and confessed to 544 murders that included 24 pregnant women.
Because let's be real, guys. It's pretty hard to kill somebody and get away with it now.
Last year, only 51% of homicides were solved. That's according to the national clearance rate. This means at least one suspect was arrested and charged.
The average person in BC was a serial killer. Have you ever read the Bible? Have you ever? I mean, come on. Let's figure it out. You guys will probably look at the length of this video and think, you probably got a lot of serial killers in this. No, we didn't get that many, honestly. There's a lot more. There's a lot more. If we got every single serial killer throughout recorded history, people who killed 1,000 people, this video would be 10 hours long. It's crazy. Seems like people have been pieces of shit for a very long time. Nothing has changed over the last 2,000 years, except for it just has gotten harder to be a successful, prolific serial killer. I just alluded that I was a serial killer. I'm not a serial killer, but I am a, yeah, I don't know. I'm just a normal guy, to be honest. I'm pretty regular. Our first killer takes us to the Western Han, which is now known as China. Liu Pingli was born to Liu Wu, Prince of Liang. He was the grandson of Emperor Wen and nephew to Emperor Jing. His father was extremely powerful and wealthy, and when he died in 144 BC, he divided his kingdom amongst his sons, meaning Liu Ping received some of that kingdom. Upon receiving land in Jidong for his kingdom and some subjects for him to rule over, Pingli went on a 30-year tirade harassing and killing his people. This guy was a jerk.
They would kill innocent people from villages and seize their belongings for the sheer sport and for no reason at all.
It's important to note that he was seen as arrogant and uncouth before his rule, but never committed any crimes while he wasn't a ruler. Probably because he didn't have any power. He was just an asshole. And when he finally got power, he made sure to abuse it. I mean, this guy, look at this son of a... I do not like this guy at all. He murdered and killed so many people. It's not even funny. I mean, it's been a while, so it's not like too soon or anything, but at the same time, messed up. Pingli recruited a small army, a gang, if you will, of 20 or 30 men who agreed with his way of thinking, and they would go out at night and choose random houses to loot and then kill the people inside. And it got so bad that people would have to board up their doors and windows like they're playing COD Zombies.
I like the way the bloody mist feels against my skin.
But instead of Richtofen, it's Liu Pingli, the king. What? That's unbelievable. They would hope and pray that the king wouldn't break in their house and kill them. After years of tormenting his people, his cousin Emperor Wu received a letter from the people of Jidong describing the horrible acts that Pingli had been committing, and upon hearing this, he launched an investigation into the claims and found that Pingli had murdered over 100 people for just fun. According to Sima Qian, a Chinese historian, he described Pingli's activities as murdering people and seizing their belongings for sheer sport. This guy, once again, dickhead. Liu Pingli's punishment was being stripped of his nobility and banished to live among the peasants in the region of Shangyang. Some believe Pingli was framed, but there is no evidence to prove that. Quite honestly, who cares? I mean, it was a long time ago. That was way back in 144 BC in ancient Han, which is like pre-China. It's pretty cool. A lot of people don't really know what's going on and what went on in China in the before the years of our Lord type era, you know? What were they doing over there? What was even happening over there, all right? All I know about them is them 12 tribes and whatnots, and them Hellenistic folks. The next ancient killer is once again a ruler of a kingdom. This is going to be a bit of a theme, guys. However, instead of killing their subjects, they killed their spouses. Queen Anula of Anuradhapura, definitely not saying that shit right, was the first queen to rule Sri Lanka from 47 BC to 42 BC, and she rose to power by marrying King Chornaga, and he ruled for 12 years before she poisoned him. It is said that she favored a palace guard named Kudatissa, son of the king before Chornaga. And at the time of his rule, Kuta was a child king under Anula's control. She was like queen regent, I guess that's what that called. I learned that shit from Game of Thrones. Yeah, that's queen regent, Game of Thrones, based, red-pilled. After about 3 years of ruling the kingdom, she poisoned him as well and moved on to a different palace guard named Sevilla. And as you can imagine, he didn't rule for very long before he was also poisoned and killed by her. She was insane. Eventually, no more palace guards would get with Anula, so she moved to marrying commoner. One was Vatuka, a carpenter, and another was Darubathika Tissa, a wood carrier. Guy's job was literally to carry wood. I bet he was strong as shit. That's crazy. She also married a palace priest named Nilia, and she would go on to poison all three of them and then declare herself the ruler of the kingdom. Once again, a crazy, insane, lunatic person. Why'd she marry so many random people? I don't know how kingdoms work in Sri Lanka. Queen Circe's reign of terror, Anula's reign of terror would come to an end when the brother of Kuta Tissa, Kutakana Tissa, went to the palace with an army and burned it down with her inside. Mother of Dragon style. I mean, what is this? Is this just Game of Thrones? Is that where they got this shit at? There's no incest. I mean, wouldn't be surprised. During her rule and shortly after his brother's death, Kuta fled the kingdom and created an army strong enough to surround the palace and burn it down to the ground. And after her death, Kuta became king and ruled the kingdoms for 3 decades. I'm not entirely clear on Anula's motives. Right? If she wanted to rule the kingdom, she had multiple chances to do so. She could have poisoned her first husband and then become queen, but her lust for killing and marrying random people led to the deaths of numerous kings and random people, I don't know. Very strange, bizarre behavior. Classic Sri Lankan royalty moment. Following Anula is another famous poisoner, Locusta. She was actually a poison maker who worked for Agrippina the Younger, wife of Claudius and mother to the infamous emperor of Rome, Nero. You've probably heard of him, whom Locusta also worked for. That's our poisoning here. By 54 AD, Locusta was already notorious for her poisoning and imprisoned for poisoning people around Rome. She was quite a prolific poisoner. Agrippina the Younger came to Locusta and asked her to make poison for her husband Claudius, and she gave Agrippina a mushroom with poison sprinkled on it. It was given to Claudius's food tester, Halidas, and was ineffective. Eventually, Claudius' doctor, Gaius Tertinius Xenophon, poisoned Claudius by shoving a poisoned feather into his throat. And this was to induce vomiting, because people love to eat and then throw up in ancient Rome. It was a very Hunger Games type thing. So Locusta failed. Eventually, the doctor succeeded. She remained in prison after failing to poison Claudius. However, it wouldn't be long before she was called upon again, this time by Agrippina's son, Nero. Claudius died. Claudius was like the adoptive father of Nero, and Agrippina married Claudius after Claudius' father died. So yeah, after Claudius' death, Nero came to rule Rome, and there was one thing that threatened Nero's rule, and that was Claudius' other son, Britannicus. Ever heard of him? So in 55 CE, Nero asked Locusta to create a poison to kill Britannicus. The first attempt on his life failed because the poison was slow to work, and Nero would personally punish Locusta in prison by flogging her himself and threatening to kill her. What a bunch of weirdos. But after the beating, she would produce a better poison and it would work, and Britannicus would succumb. And this was the day before his 14th birthday. Very Game of Thronesy. Nero, I mean, this is basically going down the list of inspiration of rulers for Game of Thrones, the most prolific serial killers of all time. Delicious water. Take a water break. It's been a couple minutes in this video. Take a water break. Go drink some water for a minute, all right? Hi, if you're watching on the TV, I'm gonna pop out and do 3D. Whoa, wow, God, it's IMAX. Back into it. Nero would reward Locusta by releasing her from prison and giving her a country estate. That's pretty baller. However, when Nero fled Rome in 68 CE, the next emperor, Galba, would lead her through the city in chains and then publicly execute her. Game of Thrones, once again. So far, of all the killers we have covered, they've been well-known rulers, or in some way, they've been associated with the government. And that's pretty much the only reason that their stories were written down. Otherwise, they would just be forgotten to history. Because, in my opinion, you go down the street in, let's say, let's say the Kazakh region, okay? Let's say the Kazakhs in 7th century AD, okay? You talk to a guy with a family and he's like maybe 45, he's killed 5 or 6 people, in my opinion. You talk to a random man in the Caucasus, probably killed 5 or 6 people. You talk to the average, maybe not farmers or people around kind of larger cities, I feel like they're probably more they're probably more yeller. That's what we call them in the country. Them yeller folk? No, not like that. Them, yellow in the belly. Cowards is what I'm talking about, all right? Country people back then, 5, 6 murders, at least, throughout their lives. You get in a disagreement, you kill somebody. I tell you what. And you go back before the Common Era, I mean, people were killing everybody. Everybody was just getting murdered. It's insane. I miss those days. That's why whenever people romanticize the past, I scoff and I balk at them. I go, you're an idiot. I would murder you if I was in the past. I would be a murderer for sure if it was in the past. I get so angry sometimes. Sometimes I just see red. Imagine you see red and you have a club in your hand and there's a hairy guy in front of you who hasn't washed in 8 days and he smells like shit. Now, we have one more early serial killer. These are all kind of in the early category, and the identity of this killer is not actually known. So it's sort of different from the others in this part of the list. All that we know is what they did and where they did it. The Abbasid Caliphate was the 3rd caliphate to follow the Islamic prophet Muhammad. Its central government was stationed in Kufa, 110 miles south of Baghdad, Iraq, in 871 CE in the city of Kark, a neighborhood in the city of Baghdad. That's what it is now. A man was found to be strangling numerous women and then burying their bodies in his house. After this was discovered, he was dragged to a square where he received 2,000 lashings and 400 hits to his feet with a bastonado, which is a wooden stick. And after his beating, he was still breathing, so they beat his testicles with wooden floggers until he presumably died from shock due to the immense pain and torture he endured. His body was then burned and left to rot in the town square. I mean, that's crazy, dude. Deserved it, though. I feel like that's probably why there's not that many serial killers, is because that happened to them. You got caught killing random women and stuff, you're dead, bro. You don't get thrown in a jail cell to rot. You get killed slowly with sticks and somehow your balls. Like, you know how many hits to your balls it would take to die? I feel like a shit ton. What are you barking at? Stop. Shoo. All this talk of horrible, evil people is making me hungry for candy. If only I had a candy brand. Sour Boys Sour Candy. 52 weeks, 52 flavors. Look at all these flavors we've got. They're really good. Go to sour.gg, buy some sour candy. It's sour licorice. We also have sour gummies called Little Guys. Same brand though. Use code JUSTICE for 20% off your order for this video. I'm gonna go ahead and make it right now. Let's do code BIG JUSTICE. Boom! 20% off, 200 uses. There you go, guys. Code BIG JUSTICE, boom! So go to sour.gg and support the channel today, my friends. Thank you, Frankie. She's chiming in for the last little moment here. Good girl. So far, in all of the instances we've covered, the killers have gotten what they deserve. And ancient killers may be far in the past, but that doesn't mean that people stopped killing, my friends. Let's move on a little bit. The next killers lurked in a more developed society and enjoyed more modern technologies in the Middle Ages. Just kidding, by the way. That's not true. Rome was more advanced than the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages sucked. I love Rome. I'm very pro-Rome. I'm Sicilian. I'm 13% Sicilian. You couldn't tell by my Cro-Magnon trog face. No offense to any Sicilians out there, but I have my grandfather's face shape, and he is a Sicilian man. His father was named Augustus. That's pretty cool. The medieval times was a period of time marked by savagery on both sides of the law. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Braveheart, but it's a real heartstring tugger, I've got to say. There was bad people in the medieval times on both sides as well, and if you weren't a massive, total idiot, getting away with murder wasn't exactly that difficult. The consideration of forensics and investigating was still hundreds of years away at this time, obviously, and to deter criminality, people who would commit crimes needed to fear what would happen to them if they were caught. So they would do things like, you know, cut your hand off if you stole a carrot, or chop off your penis if you gave someone syphilis. I don't know what they would do, but I know they would chop off hands for carrots. I do know that. That's true. They called me Carrot Boy when I was a kid. I know things about carrots. If you were a killer in these times, your punishment could be anything terrible under the sun, and it pretty much always ended in you being sent to whatever gods or devils you feared. This fellow named Peter Niers comes to mind when I'm talking about serial killers in the medieval times. Peter Niers is a man who is regarded as a monster in any era of human history, not just the medieval times. He's got heavy Borderlands bandit, psycho bandit leader energy. He was considered so evil that many believed him to be a powerful black magician with supernatural abilities, and he was active during the 16th century for between 11 to 15 years and became something of a legend to some and the actual boogeyman to others after killing over 500 people. If it's a crime you can think of, he did it. And he did it well. Theft, torture, murder, infanticide, cannibalism. At one point, Peter had been captured, but somehow he managed to Houdini his way out of that situation and escape, which elevated his already legendary status even further. He was so ruthless and efficient at both murder and evading capture that it was believed that he made a pact with the devil himself to obtain supernatural abilities that aided him in his reign of terror and evil. And this is where his crimes of infanticide come into play. Of his 544 victims, 24 of them were pregnant women that he killed for their fetuses alone. And this act of cannibalism and ritualization would give him various supernatural powers, like shapeshifting into inanimate objects like stones, logs, and any animal form at will. He could become invisible. He could become completely silent, which would allow him to break into people's homes at night without waking them. And then, ow! Peter kind of had a bit of a cult going on too. He wasn't alone in his crimes. He was joined by 25 to 50 men who joined him in the killings, robberies, and satanic rituals. He could be considered truly a cult leader by today's standards, and these men also supposedly bonded themselves with Satan through Peter and through their rituals. Though these losers were not granted the same supernatural gifts as their leader. Obviously, he's a cult of personality. He's the guy. He's the I don't know, dude. In all actuality, rather than being an unholy devil-powered shape-shifting warlock dickhead, he was just a demented man who found a group of like-minded demented degenerates, and they became a gang of bandits that just waited in the forests and hills outside of towns for unsuspecting folks to rob, murder, and torture and brutalize. The disturbing brutality and insanity of his killings and pattern of horrifying behavior propelled him into a legendary status, Peter, the legend black magician, asshole. This legendary status and fear of Peter became a tool, as the law didn't necessarily want to confront them. Who would want to confront someone or put themselves in the path of someone who is rumored to have supernatural abilities and eats babies and who has made a deal with the devil? Who the would want to do that? I certainly wouldn't. I would now. I would shoot him in the head with an AR-15. Actually, I have one. I'll go get it. It's not real. It's an airsoft gun. Don't worry. But if Peter was real, I would get him with this. I think I would get him, or I would try at least. I would definitely try. Yeah, Peter, you see that? This guy wasn't just a ruthless degenerate. He was also a brilliant mass murderer. Brilliant, used very loosely. Not good brilliant, but like he was really smart and really good at it. He was really, really good at it. He paid a lot of attention to the people from the areas he terrorized. He became a master of disguise, a chameleon, able to change his appearance, mannerisms, and potentially his accent. This would allow him to seamlessly blend into crowds like a character from Assassin's Creed and then just,
let's have a look.
I mean, he was terrible. Like, I didn't know about him before the research for this video, and it's surprising. It really is surprising. It's a surprising thing to learn about this evil guy, this fucking asshole from ancient times. I can see why he was such a legend to the people that he terrorized during a time of fear, starvation, murder, robbery, and disease. It's pretty easy to add a super-powered black magician to the list of potential dangers and just be like, all right, well, I'm gonna live in my small wooden hole, and I'm gonna hope that my wife doesn't die during childbirth, and that the winter won't come and kill us all, and the plague from across the sea won't infect my 7-year-old. He is my only living son. I've had 75 kids. He's the only one who survived. He's the oldest. 7. He's 7. He's the oldest. All the others didn't make it. Poor taste in jokes aside, it seems like when people are struggling to live and, times are tough, back in the medieval times, it's really easy to believe that someone can just vanish into thin air or turn themselves into a log or a cat instead of just altering their appearance to just simply look like someone else. It's very, very low on the list of things, rationality that is. Neil's disguises were not just about evasion, but also manipulation tools. He often posed as a trustworthy person to lure his victims into a false sense of security, and Niels knew how to use his personas to get close to those he intended to harm, his victims. They believed that they were dealing with an honest man and they would let down their guard, never realizing that they were in danger until it was too late. However, one thing about his disguises never changed. He would always carry with him 2 pistols, a broadsword, and money. Because of these commonalities among attacks, people began to know what to look for, and people who survived and offered descriptions were able to close the net even further. He was described as a rather old man with crooked fingers and a scar on his chin. He was eventually caught whilst trying to take a bath at a lodge in Newmarket called the Bells. The details of his general appearance had become widespread knowledge due to the legend of Peter growing, and he was recognized, and people from the town pressured the innkeeper to open his leather pouch, and they found it full of fetuses and dried hearts. Allegedly. I don't know why you would carry that around, but I don't know. That's very strange. When Peter was apprehended for the second time in 1581, they were sure to not let him escape again. The capture of Peter was obviously celebrated as a monumental victory of justice, but the people at the time, they wanted a little bit more. They believed that a man as evil as Niers deserved more than a swift death. He needed to be made an example of. Thus, they began a prolonged and excruciating process of torture designed to punish him for his unspeakable acts. Punishments for criminals were already incredibly inhumane and would never be allowed in modern society. Just in general, people would be prodded with red-hot metal bars, branded, boiled alive, or worse, and these were just common occurrences in everyday life. But our old boy Peter was subjected to 3 days of excruciating torture, potentially worse than what was normally reserved for the worst criminals as discussed, and the town exacted justice, which was more like revenge, it seems like, for what Peter had done over the course of a decade. And on the first day of Peter's torture, he had strips of his flesh skinned from his body with hot oil poured into the wounds. On the second day, Peter was held above burning coals with his feet greased, essentially roasting him alive like a chicken. And on the third, final day, it was worse than the first 2. He was strapped to a breaking wheel. Here is a breaking wheel. If you don't know what that is, it is a device used for capital punishment reserved for the most hated criminals, and it always killed its victims very slowly. Very, very slowly. Someone subjected to a breaking wheel is tied to the spokes, and while the wheel is slowly turned, the torturer hits the victim with a hammer or some kind of heavy object that will easily break the victim's bones. And once their bones are broken, they are left on the wheel to die. Sometimes the wheel would be placed on a tall pole so birds could feed on the person while they were still living. Wow. The old book on torture, eh? That's crazy. That's crazy. Let's go band for band on who has the worst torture methods.
Fuck that, we can go M for M.
To be fair as well, I know a lot of people are probably like, oh, it's not the medieval times, 1580. Yeah, I understand. It's the Renaissance. I get it. Just kind of wanted to put this guy in with the medieval people because it's right on the precipice. He was kind of born just at the end of the Middle Ages, the medieval times. I don't really know, dude. It seemed pretty medieval to me. Anyways, back to the breaking wheel. For Peter, the breaking wheel wasn't enough. He would receive 42 bone-breaking hits, and when that still did not kill him, his executioner quartered him by sawing his limbs from his body. And that's crazy. It was during this period of torture and his extended execution that Peter Niers admitted to 544 murders, powered or some kind of transformed essence. Whether or not these people came to these beliefs on their own or by trying to rationalize the brutality of killings, or from these killers believing themselves to be special or transformed and telling the world about their devil-given gifts, we are not exactly sure. But one book from 1612 called Tableau de Inconstantie des Mauvais Anges et Demons. Tableau de Inconstantie des Mauvais Demons. Something like that. I don't know. I ain't French or whatever. It translates to Painting the Inconstancy of Evil Angels and Demons by Pierre de Lancry, or whatever. I don't know how to say his name. It tells many stories about mentally ill people who believe themselves to be witches, demons, or other creatures of legend doing unspeakable things. The book was translated into English by Gerlid Schultz Williams in 2006, calling it On The Inconstancy of Witches. Book 4 in the translation on page 254 is titled On the Inconstancy of Demons, and it specifies lycanthropy and the transformation of man into wolves. This is where the story of John Grenier is told, the person we're talking about. Pierre de Lancre wrote this from his own experience as he was involved in Jean Grenier's trial. In the areas surrounding Bordeaux, France, there had been reports of attacks from wild animals. One was in the small village of Paulo, where a young girl named Margaret Poyer was attacked in broad daylight by what appeared to be a wolf, but managed to fight it off with a stick. A young boy, aged 13 or 14 years old, named Jean Grenier, would claim responsibility for this attack, saying that if she hadn't fought him off with a stick, he would have eaten her, just as he had done with other young boys and girls. That's suspicious. Margaret and Jean had tended livestock together, and she'd heard that he could change into a wolf whenever he wanted, and that he had taken and killed dogs before to eat bits of meat and drink their blood, though he'd believed that it was not as good as blood from children. Another girl, Jean Gabaret, would testify that other Jean had a history of being creepy towards girls. At one point, he'd approached her and some other girls who were tending to the flock and asked who the prettiest shepherdess was, and when he was asked why he wanted to know, she said he wanted to marry the prettiest one, and he would tell Jean about his ability to change into a wolf and drinking blood from the dogs that he'd killed. Guy was a weirdo, okay? To be honest, so far, sounds like he'd be one of those folks you might find on TikTok.
Ow. 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 Ow.
There's people like Jean, whatever the fuck his name is. I don't even know how to say. I don't know how to say anything. Comment down below. A lot of times I say shit wrong on purpose to get people to comment. I'm not doing it this time. All right, guys. I'm not doing that. I don't know what the who these people's names are. What the who made this shit up? Speak English. So yeah, anyways, Jean sounds like a guy maybe who's got an overactive imagination and doesn't know how to talk to girls that well. Maybe a bit of incel rage, something like that. Jean thought that he'd find the prettiest girl and she would be attracted to his darkness and emotional complexity, and he thought that that would work on the girl of his dreams. He hoped his story would be a Twilight story where the girl falls for the monster who can't resist her.
I wanted a human's blood so much in my life.
I trust you.
And Jean's story is a lot less pleasant than that, unfortunately, and it is more along the lines of a horror movie than it's just a horror movie, to be honest. He confessed that Margaret's testimony was true and that he'd try to take her and kill her and that she'd hit him with a stick and that he'd want to marry her. How verifiable are these claims? It has yet to be investigated properly because people didn't know how to investigate shit. On June 3rd, the second investigation began. This was an attempt to see if there were any more disappearances or children who'd been discovered having been eaten during the period that Jean was referring to. Fathers of children who were eaten supposedly by a werewolf were heard, and Jean didn't object to any of the claims that were made. Witnesses could match locations and circumstances surrounding the crimes Jean had confessed to, and there were more instances than discussed in the first hearing where children had survived the attacks. And investigators spoke to a family who claimed that the plumpest of their 3 children had been taken, but was saved by a brother who was armed with a weapon and yelled, "I will get you!" Jean was later confronted with this new account and recalled the encounter with matching details, even recalling where on the child he'd inflicted wounds and how. So he bit that plump boy, I guess. This is crazy though. But if true, this means Jean is a werewolf. How would he get this ability? Jean claims that one time when he was 11 years old, he and a friend were approached by a big man dressed in black astride on a black horse who kissed them with icy lips and made the boys swear to seek him out when he called. He marked the boys with a brand on his butt in the shape of a shell, and this figure is referred to as the Lord of the Forest and later speculated to be Satan. Pierre summarized the crimes that Jean Grenier is accused of and then tried to deduce whether or not the claims of lycanthropy could be true. This was a period of time when superstition was rampant and many people feared creatures we now know to just not be real. They're mythological. They're not real. Pierre reflected on stories from the past of similarly strange claims. He was firm in his belief that the devil often works through grown men and male witches capable of violence, but is astounded by the evil displayed by such a young child, a boy of 14, Jean. He doubted that Jean could turn into a wolf, citing Pliny the Elder, the Roman author and philosopher we spoke of in the Ancient UFOs video, who is well known for these kind of stories. He also denied men being able to change into wolves and back. Pliny the Elder was a big time smart guy, big scientist guy. So what happened to Jean Grenier? A paragraph on page 323 describes how God releases those whom Satan enchains and returns those whom he enlists and brands with a mark. This cannot be considered in court to exempt a werewolf or a witch from punishment, but it shows that young people can change their ways, and Jean was to be locked up for the rest of his life in a monastery. He was to be a servant of the monastery, forbidden from leaving, and would be hung or strangled if he did. Imagine being strangled. Not even hung, but strangled. You get sentenced to strangling. Jean died in 1611 at the age of 20 or 21 years old, a year before Pierre de Lancre would author this book, and right up to his death, he had the impulse to eat the flesh of little children and found that of little girls to be particularly delicious. Jean had told Pierre this directly, and the monks of the monastery told Pierre that when Jean had first arrived, they'd seen him secretly eating raw tripe and the innards of fish, which is disgusting. As for the Lord of the Forest / Satan, Jean told Pierre that he'd been visited by him twice in early confinement at the monastery, asking if Jean wanted to return to his service, and Jean said no and never saw him again after making the cross symbol both times. I'd like to see how modern day psychiatrists would diagnose Jean and determine what kind of mental illness he suffered from. Seems like he was delusional and experienced genuine delusions and hallucinations. Something drove him to cannibalism of young children. Apparently 50. He ate 50 children. That's crazy. This is according to publications on him today. All this knowledge makes him one of the many documented monstrous children throughout history, as well as perhaps one of the youngest and earliest serial killers. I'm not sure. He was a child, basically. Now we are in the early modern era, my friends, and this is a bit more familiar. People still just as evil, just as bad, but more familiar, I guess. Heading into our early modern era, getting away with being a serial killer became a bit more difficult. By this point, record keeping had improved tenfold. People kind of all spoke similar languages. There were less regions with completely different dialects and writing and all this stuff. And police agencies were also fairly well established, meaning that if a body was found, an investigation would definitely be opened and a killer would be searched for. The next killer we're looking at is not quite as crazy and deranged, but was being opportunistic and wanted to get that bag. Our second early modern era killer is Louisa de Jesus, born on December 10th, 1748 in the municipality of Coimbra, Portugal. Her parents, Manuel and Mariana Rodriguez, were poor farmers in the region. She eventually changed her last name to Jesus, despite having no connection to her family or husband, Manuel Gomez. I don't know why she changed her name to Jesus. That's strange. I think I know why. Her day-to-day job was transporting goods between Coimbra and the nearby city of Gavinos. I'm gonna stop. I'm sorry. That's really stupid. I shouldn't be doing that. One day, Louisa would come up with a new idea to make money. Drop shipping. Just kidding. It would have a sinister twist. It was not like drop shipping at all. In the Middle Ages, a large number of orphan children were dropped off at houses and churches, etc., with no one to take care of them. So the concept of a baby box and foundling wheels was created for people to drop their babies off and guarantee that they would be taken care of. So people didn't always want their kids, but people also didn't want kids to just die. So they created these things. Very interesting. In Louisa's area, if you were willing to adopt a baby from a baby box or a fondling wheel, the Portuguese government would pay you $600 and a half meter of cotton. It's pretty cool. Knowing this, Louisa would abuse the system and adopt multiple babies either in her name or the names of clients she delivered to. She was a fraudster. She's like those idiots on TikTok doing the check fraud with Chase, but instead of with checks and ATMs, it's babies. And it gets way worse. It gets so much worse. Obviously, taking care of multiple babies is difficult. To mitigate the difficulty, she would strangle the babies and then bury them in shallow graves. So she would get a baby, get the money, kill the baby, get a baby, get the money, kill the baby. That's insane. This is potentially the worst of all of the murders we've talked about. I mean, this is insane. Not only is it evil corporatism, she profited. It was like for profit. She was punished. Her body would be burned and her ashes scattered at random. A fitting end for a horrible, horrible bit. The last killer in our early modern era that we will look at is not just one killer, but a family. of killers. In 1870, wait for it, a group of spiritualist homesteaders migrated and settled in Cherryvale, Kansas, along the Great Osage Trail, which is here, very close to that other trail that's really well known. What is it called? Oregon? I don't know, dude. This group was the Bender family. It consisted of John Bender Sr., Elvira Bender, Kate Bender, and John Bender Jr. Let's not forget about the family robot Bender from Futurama. The small family constructed a 2-room cabin with the larger room serving as a general store, while the back room was their living quarters. The travelers along the trail could stop by and get supplies, eat, and stay the night if they needed. Pretty cool, very Hateful Eight-ish. I keep making references. I don't know what's wrong with me today. I have like this thing in my brain where I'm just like, oh, that reminds me of that. I should tell everyone. Right off the bat, people began to notice how odd the family was, and they pointed out the many strange things about each family member. John Bender Sr. was about 60 years old. He spoke broken English. His speaking was unintelligible or guttural. John Sr. was described by many as a repulsive, hideous brute without a redeeming trait, dirty, profane, and ill-tempered. He was an ugly bastard, and he was also probably had something wrong with his mind. Elvira Bender, age 55, also spoke terrible broken English and was referred to as a she-devil or a dirty old Dutch crone. Her face was a fit picture of the midnight hag that wove the spell of murderous ambition about the soul of Macbeth. John Bender Jr., aged 25 years old, he was fluent in English, but he had a weird German accent. He was one of those guys. He was described as a handsome devil, not a she-devil, but also a half-wit due to his tendency to laugh aimlessly at nothing. I do that sometimes. What the f? Kate Bender, age 23, she spoke fluent English and had no accent and was a self-proclaimed psychic and healer. Kate was actually one of the biggest reasons why people stopped at the Bender's general store in the first place. She put up flyers advertising her seances and claiming she could cure any kind of ailment. And one bizarre thing, well, there's a lot of bizarre things about Kate, but one bizarre thing about Kate was that she was known publicly to support the murder of people, believing it was good. She just thought murder was good. That's a weird hill to die on. It's a little bit of foreshadowing, by the way, too. It would be less than a year before strange things started to occur in and around the area where the Benders lived. In May 1871, the body of a man named Jones was discovered in an area near their cabin called Drum Creek. However, nothing ever came in terms of finding his killer. He was buried and forgotten, and well, at least for another year or two. And just a few months later, in February of 1872, George Newton Longcore and his daughter Mary Ann disappeared from Independence, Kansas to Iowa. Roughly a year later, George's neighbor, Dr. William Henry York, went to search for his missing neighbor and disappeared somewhere between Fort Scott and Independence. And shortly after Dr. York's disappearance, his brother, a Civil War veteran and lawyer, Colonel Alexander M. York, set out to find his missing brother. It would be late March when Colonel York first arrived at the Bender's general store, and with him was Mr. Johnson and about 75 armed men. He asked them if they had seen his brother, and they said that Dr. York had stayed with them but left the next day after staying at their little weird inn. They told him that it was a possibility that he was killed by Native Americans while on the trail. You know, the ultimate scapegoat at the time. The Benders were hospitable, fed him dinner, and then they left. Less than a week later, the armed band of men returned to the cabin when they heard a story of a woman who ran from the home after Elvira threatened her with a knife. That she-devil. When confronted, the family played dumb and started making outlandish claims like the woman cursed their coffee, and when Colonel York continued to press the family, Elvira yelled at the men to get out. Seemed like she had learned some English in the few days between their first visit and this visit, because the first time Mr. York was there, both Kate and John Jr. claimed she didn't speak English that well. And on the way out of the home, John would come up to Colonel York and claim that the devil did her bidding and that she could help find the missing brother. But when he returned to the home, Kate said that she couldn't help him because there were too many men and too much noise. I can't concentrate, my spiritualism. People in the area began to say that the Osage community was to blame for the recent growing list of disappearances, and in trying to find the solution, the community had a meeting that the colonel attended. It was determined that a search warrant was needed for Drum Creek and Big Hill Creek, whatever. 3 days later, a local cattle farmer was driving his herd past the Bender's place and noticed that it was completely abandoned and their animals were left starving. Due to bad weather, the colonel's search party took a few days to reach the general store, and when they arrived, they found the house completely emptied of food and possessions. Furthermore, a horrible stench emanated from a trapdoor underneath the bed in the back room. And within the secret room was old clotted blood on top of a concrete slab. Investigators broke up the slab, thinking that a body could be beneath it, but they found nothing. And additionally, the search party physically moved the home from the pit, dug around, and found no bodies. The smell was believed to come from large amounts of blood that had soaked into the soil. So there's just like a lot of blood. They go and they stay and they get dinner and then they come back and she speaks English and then they leave and they come back and there's blood everywhere. What the f? This caused investigators to probe around in the dirt on the Benders' property, which led them to discover Dr. York's body in their orchard. And Dr. York suffered the same injuries as the man found in Drum Creek in 1781, the guy who was forgotten for about 2 years, until he wasn't forgotten anymore. He's back. Investigators continued to dig around in the apple orchard and nearby gardens. They found 19 more bodies. The victims of the Benders included Mr. Jones, which was in May 1871, the body found in Drum Creek, 2 unidentified men in February 1872, Ben Brown, W.F. McCrotty, Henry Mackenzie, Johnny Boyle, George Newton Longcore, Mary Ann, John Greery Redsmith, Abigail Roberts, everybody, all of them dead. Victims 16 through 19 were also killed in December of 1872. All 4 of their bodies were found in the Drum Creek area. And Dr. William York was killed in May 1873. He was buried in the apple orchard. And I mean, what a crazy family. So how did these people commit all these murders? Well, it was believed that guests would participate in one of Kate's seances, and Kate would sit outside of the table while the guest would sit against the cloth partition that divided the room. Then, while Kate performed the seance, John Sr. or his son would hit the guest in the head with a hammer. And then once the person was deceased, the Benders would take their possessions and either keep them or sell them in their general store. There were also multiple instances of people surviving the family and fleeing before anything occurred. Old lady named Mrs. Fitz was eating dinner at the store when she heard a shuffling sound from behind the canvas, and Kate was beginning to say something when Mrs. Fitz felt scared and fled from the home. Another instance involved 2 men who refused to sit at the table and instead preferred to eat at the main counter. Kate became belligerent with them when they refused to sit at the table, and as this was happening, both Bender men came out from behind the cloth curtain, causing both men to flee. So they were just murderers, and they had this weird trapdoor game. I mean, it's insane. So, were they ever caught? No! They weren't. But we do know some things. They're not out there now. It's been a long ass time. It's been almost 200 years. Investigators were able to follow wagon tracks to the town of Thayer, where they found the family's wagon abandoned and their horses starved, and it was confirmed by the train conductor that he had seen the family board his train headed north to Humboldt, Kansas. And from there, they split up. John Jr. and Kate were able to board a train heading south to Denison, Texas, where they then fled to outlaw country. And John Sr. and Elvira got on a train to Kansas City and then one to St. Louis, where they still live today. I'm just kidding. They don't. They're dead. A few times people did claim that they saw Benders, or they claimed that someone was a Bender, and even a court case occurred because of such claims. However, no one was ever charged because the profiles didn't match, or they found out that they were lying or whatever. People were just taking credit, false pretenses, etc. We really don't have any justice in this situation, but the closest thing to it, apparently John Sr.'s real last name was Flickinger, and an older man by the name of John Flickinger took his own life a few years after the Benders fled. So, seems like no one will truly know what happened to the Benders, but what we do know is that they were horrible people, pieces of shit. Daria Nikolaevna.
Daria Nikolaevna Saltykova.
Daria Nikolaevna.
Daria Nikolaevna Saltykova.
Daria Nikolaevna.
Daria Nikolaevna Saltykova.
Nikolaevna.
Nikolaevna.
Ivanova.
What?
Was born to a Russian nobleman, Nikolai Avtonomovich Ivanov, and his wife, Anna Ivanova Davidova. Dude. These names, they're killing me. Anna grew up very wealthy and eventually married Gleb, a member of the Saltykov family, a prestigious Russian family with ancestry tying back to the 1200s, so like inbreeding, etc. Prestigious that's what that meant. Inbreeding. We our cousins, is what that means. Like the Kennedys. Gleb Alexievich Saltykov. That's a much cooler name. Anna's marriage wouldn't last too long. Gleb would die at the age of 25, leaving her with a massive estate and around 140 serfs to manage her 2 villages. Her 2 sons were enrolled in the Capital Guards regiments, leaving her alone in her big house with only her servants to keep her company. However, this is where things would take a dark turn. 6 months after her husband's death, Daria began to exhibit strange behavior. She would begin to beat servants with logs found throughout her massive house. At first, it was a single whack in the head to bring them to their senses, but later on it turned into severe beatings, which left life-threatening wounds. But Daria wasn't satisfied by just beating her servants with a log. She eventually moved on to pulling all of their hair out and poking them with scorching tongs. And because she was royalty, there was nothing people could do. Oh my God, it's almost like there's nothing you can do when royalty is crazy. You can't do anything at all. It's almost like you can't do anything. What? Couldn't all the serfs in the house just beat the shit out of her? And then that's better than not, you know? That's better. Daria would eventually grow tired of doing these beatings herself, and she would hire some people called haiduks to do this for her. However, in 1757, Daria grew lustful to participate in the punishment of her serfs because she had been out of the game for so long. In December of that year, she would torture a woman by the name of Anisia Grigorieva. Now, this is a little confusing, but the reason that Daria wasn't initially suspected of foul play, in spite of the police finding her beat and she died from wounds and blood poisoning, whatever. The reason that they didn't expect her, she was a serf of Daria, was because when her husband came forward with the first official denunciation of Daria, saying that she killed my wife, he had fled her serfdom. He had fled Daria's serfdom, and because he fled, police deemed him fleeing to avoid punishment for beating his own wife to death, so the case was dropped, which is quite unfortunate. The guy was named Tropim Stepanov, the husband who had escaped. He was eventually captured and killed on the Saltykov's estate. So, that's quite bad. It just got way worse. Daria now doesn't just beat people, she beats them to death, and then the people who say she beat them to death, they also get killed, because the police are just like, nah, dude, it's the Saltykovs. They're chill. After this first kill, Daria unfortunately would go on a rampage for the next 5 years. In 1759, she tortured a young servant boy named Chrysanth Andreev for a full day. The reason for his torture was poor supervision of the washing of floors. Her last victim was named Fekla Gerasimova, who died on July 17th, 1762, and according to witnesses, she received the worst beating to date. She was beaten inside Daria's house and then brought to the village of Troitskaya. The village elder commented on the state of her body. He said that her hair had been torn out of her head had been broken, and her back had rotted. And he questioned why Daria wanted him to prepare a funeral despite her being alive, but was forced to go through with the request. She was still living. Daria committed other heinous acts as well, including starving serfs to death, beating another 12-year-old girl to death in her courtyard, and locking people in shackles and stocks till they died from exposure. She even tried to plant barrels of gunpowder underneath Captain Chechiev's home. Chechiev was a former lover, and when he found a new wife, Daria wanted him to die. So she wanted to plant, like, Looney Tunes, gunpowder barrels under his house. The only reason that the gunpowder didn't go off was because the serfs she sent to plant and detonate the devices backed down in fear of the repercussions by the Russian government. So she had her own little cult as well, it seemed like. And by the way, when the serfs came back, they were severely flogged for failing to detonate the large barrels and blow up the captain's house. This bitch is fucking crazy, okay? Okay, guys? I mean, that's just all there is. All this madness would come to an end when 3 relatives of Daria's victims came forward in 1762 and demanded Empress Catherine II look into the disappearances and deaths surrounding the Saltykov estate. Following the letter sent to Catherine, a 5-year investigation found that Daria had murdered 138 of her serfs, and the acts of Saltykov were corroborated by numerous village people who witnessed the public spectacles done by Daria. So in the end, the bitch got what was coming to her. She was found guilty in October of 1768 and sentenced to an hour of abusive spectacle, which meant she was forced to climb tall scaffolding in the Red Square in front of hundreds of onlookers with the words torturer and murderer around her neck, as well as an indefinite underground imprisonment. So you got sent to the gulags, pre-gulag, but still, gulag moment. Her underground cell was 7 feet down. She was kept in complete darkness besides the candles she was given when she was served her meals. And her only contact with humans was the head of a guard and the head of a nun. She'd be kept in the cell for 11 years before being transferred. That's terrible. Totally deserved, but still, that's a bad punishment, being just in the ground for 11 years. Huh? 2 people in the ground, darkness? Huh? Daria would eventually be moved to the Cathedral Church Ivanovsky Monastery, where they built a special room just for her, and visitors to the monastery would go up to the one window in her room and watch her be locked away, like the Braithwaite woman on Red Dead Redemption, where you go and you find a little building and she's in there and she goes, "Ah!" and stuff. Eventually, it became a tourist spot for people to bring their kids to view the famous Saltykova. Now, this would have broken me, for sure, but it didn't break Daria. According to Russian historians, she cursed, spat, and stuck a stick through the bars into the open window in the summer, thus revealing her deep-rooted cruelty, which no remorse or wariness from the imprisonment of her atrocities, it couldn't extinguish her fucking, she was impossible to get down, dude. This woman just on the grind all day, every single day, being evil. The now deceased state councilor Rudin, who saw Saltykova at the end of the last century, or the 18th century, I guess, told PG Kichev that she was plump and already in her old age, and from her movements, it seemed that she was not in her right mind. Yeah, figures. The ultimate torture, though, children would come to her window and sing a song about her just to fucking piss her off all the time, so. She died in a room in 1801, and clearly, there was something wrong with this woman. I might be Daria's #1 hater. I don't know what is up with this woman. This is crazy. Her desire to want to punish and beat people to death for the smallest of errors really showed the level of derangement that she was afflicted with. I'm not sure that she had. I don't know what the proper fucking way to phrase that would be. So yeah. L in chat for Daria. Fuck Daria, dude. Anyways, thanks for watching, guys. Hopefully you all enjoyed. If you did, press the like button down below. If you want to see an uncensored version of this video, go to the Gump Club. Join the Gump Club. First month's free. You get a bunch of cool stuff. For Sour Boys, it's a part of Sour Boys. It's a membership thing. We also have like unique stuff. We have mouse pads, custom art, stuff like that. It's pretty cool. It's like pretty much the only merch that I have is candy. Also go to sour.gg, buy some candy. If you join the Gump Club, you get free shipping and all sorts of cool shit. Just click the links in the description. Go down below. Buy some candy, whatever. I don't really care. I love you guys. I appreciate it. And hopefully you enjoyed this video.